The whispers trailed after Nora Nielsen like an unwanted shadow as she moved down the bustling main street of Fort Smith, Arkansas. It was the summer of 1878, and at 30 years of age, Nora was well past what society deemed an acceptable time for remaining unwed. The sideways glances and hushed conversations behind fluttering fans had become a constant companion over the years. But today, they stung more than usual after Mrs. Abernathy's sewing circle had made their opinions painfully clear. "Good morning, Miss Nielsen," called Mr. Donovan from his general store doorway, emphasizing the miss just enough to remind her of her status. "Will your father be needing anything from town today?" Nora forced a polite smile. "No, thank you. We're well stocked at present." She quickened her pace, clutching her parcels more tightly against her chest. The morning sun beat down on Fort Smith, promising another scorching summer day. Already the heat was causing perspiration to gather at the back of her neck beneath her neatly pinned chestnut hair. The territorial courthouse loomed ahead, and Nora took a deep breath. As the town's only female clerk, she had carved out a small but respectable position for herself, even if some considered it merely a stopgap until marriage. 8 years she had worked there, keeping meticulous records and managing correspondence for Judge Parker and his staff. It was work she took pride in, work that mattered. "There she goes," a woman's voice carried from across the street. 30 years old and still carrying on with that job. Her poor father must be beside himself. Nora's jaw tightened, but she kept walking, head high. Her father, in fact, had long ago made peace with his daughter's independent streak and unmarried status. Edward Nielsen, the town's respected blacksmith, had supported her education and her choice to work, even when others raised eyebrows. Inside the courthouse, the familiar scent of paper, ink, and polished wood greeted her. This place had become her sanctuary, the one location in town where her worth was measured by her competence rather than her marital status. "Morning, Miss Nielsen," called Deputy Marshal Williams as he passed, tipping his hat respectfully. At least here in this domain of law and order, the miss didn't carry the same sting. "Good morning, Deputy," she replied, setting her things at her desk. "I heard there's a prisoner transport coming in today." "Yes, madam. Wagon should be arriving before noon." "We've got 3 men coming in to face the judge." Nora nodded and began organizing her workspace for the day. The Western District Court of Arkansas was notoriously busy, with jurisdiction over much of Indian Territory. Judge Parker wasn't called the hanging judge without reason, and the court's docket was perpetually full. By mid-morning, Nora was deep into her work, copying court documents and organizing files. The sound of commotion outside pulled her attention away from her task. Curious, she moved to the window. A prison wagon had pulled up, dust still settling around it as several deputies dismounted from their horses. One by one, they began escorting shackled men down from the wagon. The first 2 looked like the usual sort, rough-hewn, unshaven men with hostile expressions. But the 3rd prisoner gave her pause. Unlike the others, this man walked with his head high, his bearing almost dignified despite the irons at his wrists. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. Even from a distance, there was something compelling about him, perhaps the way he surveyed his surroundings with alert, intelligent eyes, rather than the defeated slump of most incoming prisoners. "Who is that?" Nora asked as Judge Parker's bailiff came to stand beside her. "That'd be Preston Vaughn," the bailiff replied. "Cattle rustling charges out of the nations, though word is he claims it's all a misunderstanding. Isn't that what they all say?" Nora replied, turning away from the window to return to her desk. "This one's different from what I hear. Owned a successful ranch over in the Cherokee Nation until recently. Educated man, speaks proper, got witnesses vouching for his character too. Nora glanced back at the window. The man, Preston Vaughn, was being led into the courthouse now. Well, I suppose the court will determine the truth of it. Later that afternoon, Judge Parker instructed Nora to bring documents to the jail cells beneath the courthouse. It wasn't an unusual request, as prisoners often needed to sign papers or provide depositions before their hearings. The stairs to the basement jail were worn smooth from years of use. Marshal Caldwell nodded at her as she reached the bottom. "Need to see Vaughn," she explained, holding up the document folder. "Judge wants his statement before tomorrow's hearing." "End cell on the right," the marshal directed. "He's been quiet, no trouble." Nora moved down the corridor, passing cells filled with men of varying degrees of dishevelment and desperation. Some called out to her, but she kept her eyes forward, having long ago learned to ignore such behavior. When she reached the last cell, she found Preston Vaughn sitting on his cot, reading a book. The sight was unusual enough that she paused momentarily. Few prisoners requested reading material. He looked up at her approach, and Nora was struck by the clarity in his blue eyes. Unlike the anger or resignation she usually encountered in these cells, his gaze was steady and thoughtful. "Mr. Vaughn," she said formally, "I've brought papers from Judge Parker. He requires your statement regarding the events at Turkey Creek." Vaughn stood, closing his book carefully. "Miss Nielsen, Nora Nielsen, I'm the court clerk." A slight smile formed on his lips. "A lady clerk, that's progressive for Fort Smith." Nora's spine straightened. "Judge Parker values competence above all else." "As do I," Vaughn replied, approaching the bars. "May I see these papers?" She passed the documents through the slot designed for meal trays. "You'll need to read and sign the statement. If you have corrections, note them clearly in the margins." Their fingers brushed momentarily during the exchange, and Nora was surprised by the warmth that radiated from the brief contact. Up close, Preston Vaughn was even more striking. Sun-weathered skin, a strong jaw shadowed by a day's growth of beard, and those penetrating eyes that seemed to look right through pretenses. "Been with the court long, Miss Nielsen?" he asked as he began reviewing the papers. 8 years. He glanced up, eyebrows rising slightly. "That's impressive. It's a job, Mr. Vaughn, and clearly one you're good at." He leaned against the bars, studying her with unexpected intensity. "Most folks would have certain expectations for a woman of your position by now." The implication hung in the air. Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks, partly from irritation and partly from the directness of his gaze. "My personal circumstances are not relevant to court business, Mr. Vaughn." He nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Of course." "My apologies." He returned to the papers, reading carefully for several minutes before looking up again. "This statement is incorrect. I wasn't at Turkey Creek on the 12th. I was in Tahlequah meeting with Chief Dennis Bushyhead. I have witnesses." Nora frowned. "That's a significant discrepancy." "It's the difference between guilt and innocence, Miss Nielsen." His voice remained calm, but there was an undercurrent of urgency. "I didn't steal those cattle. I'm being framed by the Harker brothers who want my water rights." Something in his tone made Nora hesitate. After years of working with the court, she developed a sense for detecting lies. Preston Vaughn didn't strike her as a liar. "I'll note your correction and inform the judge," she said finally. "But you understand it's not my place to determine truth," he finished for her. "No, but I suspect you've got a good eye for it nonetheless." Nora watched as he made careful annotations on the document before signing it with a firm, educated hand. When he passed it back through the slot, their fingers brushed again. "Thank you for your assistance, Miss Nielsen," he said, his voice lower now. "Perhaps we'll meet under better circumstances someday." "Perhaps," she replied noncommittally, though something about the way he looked at her, not with pity or judgment about her unmarried state, but with genuine interest, lingered in her mind as she climbed the stairs back to the courthouse proper. That evening, as Nora walked the 3 blocks to her father's home, the encounter with Preston Vaughn kept replaying in her head. It wasn't often that someone looked at her and seemed to see beyond the surface, beyond the label of spinster that Fort Smith had assigned her. "There you are," her father called as she entered their modest home. Edward Nielsen's large frame was stooped from years at the forge, but his handshake remained powerful and his voice robust. "Was beginning to think Judge Parker had decided to keep you working through supper." Nora smiled, hanging her bonnet on the hook by the door. "Nearly. We had a new batch of prisoners come in today. So I heard. Hendricks stopped by the forge to have his wagon wheel fixed, said they brought in a rancher from the Nations on rustling charges." Her father moved to the stove where a pot of stew simmered. "Doesn't sound like the usual sort that ends up in Parker's court." "No," Nora agreed, helping to set the table. "He's different." Edward gave his daughter a curious look. "Different how?" Nora shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "Educated. Well-spoken. Claims he's innocent." "They all do," her father chuckled, ladling stew into bowls. "Though Parker usually sorts the wheat from the chaff well enough." They sat down to their meal, falling into their usual comfortable conversation about the day's events. Edward Nielsen had raised Nora alone since her mother died of influenza when Nora was just 10. Over the years, they'd developed a relationship built on mutual respect that many fathers and daughters never achieved. "Mrs. Abernathy stopped by the forge today," Edward said casually, though Nora could tell from his tone that the visit had been anything but casual. "Oh," Nora kept her eyes on her stew. "What did she want?" "Apparently her nephew is coming to visit next month. Fine young man, according to her. Banking clerk from Little Rock." Edward's voice held a note of wry amusement. "She thought perhaps you might like to join them for dinner when he arrives." Nora put down her spoon. "And what did you tell her?" "I told her my daughter makes her own social arrangements." He reached across the table to pat her hand. "Though I did suggest that if her nephew wanted to meet you, he might try the courthouse during business hours, provided he has legitimate court business." Nora smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Pa." "Nora," Edward's voice grew serious. "You know I've never pressed you about marriage. Your mother and I had a love match and I wouldn't want less for you, but are you happy?" Truly, the question caught her off guard. Was she happy? Nora had her work, which gave her purpose. She had her father, whose company she enjoyed. She had her books and her small circle of friends, mostly other working women like herself. But there were moments, quiet evenings or Sunday afternoons, when a peculiar emptiness crept in, a sense that perhaps there was something more life could offer. "I'm content," she answered carefully. "I know the town thinks it's strange that I'm 30 and unmarried. Mrs. Abernathy made that perfectly clear at the sewing circle yesterday. But I'd rather be unmarried than wed to someone I don't love just to satisfy convention." Edward nodded slowly. "Your mother would be proud of you, standing by your principles. But don't close your heart entirely, Nora. There are good men in this world. The right one might still come along." "Perhaps," she said, echoing her earlier response to Preston Vaughn, though for some reason his face flashed in her mind at her father's words. The next morning, Nora arrived at the courthouse early. The summer sun was already hot, promising another scorching day. Inside, she found Judge Parker already at his desk, reviewing case files. "Ah, Miss Nielsen," he said, looking up from his papers. "I've been examining the Vaughn case. His statement contradicts our primary witness. Yes, Your Honor. He claims to have been in Tahlequah meeting with Chief Bushyhead on the day in question. Judge Parker stroked his beard thoughtfully. An easily verifiable alibi. I've sent a telegram to the Cherokee Nation offices. We should have confirmation by this afternoon. He shuffled through the papers. What was your impression of the man? The question surprised Nora. Judge Parker rarely asked for her opinion on prisoners. He seems credible, Your Honor, well-educated, not the typical cattle thief. My thoughts exactly. The judge leaned back in his chair. The Harker brothers who brought these charges have appeared in my court before. Never as defendants, always as accusers. Always against men whose land they later acquired when those men were imprisoned. You suspect a pattern? I do. Judge Parker's eyes narrowed. I believe in justice, Miss Nielsen, not persecution. If Mr. Vaughn is being falsely accused, I want to know it. By midday, a response had arrived from Tahlequah, confirming that Preston Vaughn had indeed been in council with Chief Bushyhead on the date of the alleged cattle theft. Judge Parker immediately ordered a hearing. Nora sat at her desk in the courtroom as Preston was brought in, still in shackles but looking more composed than the day before. His eyes found hers briefly, and she was startled by the spark of connection that passed between them. The hearing was brief, but thorough. Judge Parker listened as both the prosecution and defense presented their cases. The Harker brothers, two burly, red-faced men with matching sneer, maintained their accusation, but their story began to unravel under the judge's incisive questioning. By contrast, Preston spoke clearly and confidently, providing detailed accounts of his whereabouts that were corroborated by the telegram. The court finds insufficient evidence to proceed with this case, Judge Parker announced finally. The charges against Preston Vaughn are hereby dismissed. Mr. Vaughn, you are free to go. Relief washed over Preston's face as the deputy removed his shackles. The Harker brothers stormed out, muttering threats that the bailiff quickly silenced. As the courtroom cleared, Preston approached the judge's bench. Thank you, Your Honor, for your fairness. Justice was served, Mr. Vaughn. That's all. Judge Parker gathered his papers. Though I suggest you watch your back. Men like the Harkers don't take defeat graciously. I'm well aware. Preston's expression darkened momentarily before he glanced toward Nora's desk. Miss Nielsen, might I have a word? Nora looked to Judge Parker, who nodded his permission before leaving the courtroom. She stood as Preston approached her desk. I wanted to thank you, he said, his voice low and sincere. I believe you had something to do with the judge giving my case a closer look. I merely did my job, Mr. Vaughn. Preston, he corrected gently. And sometimes doing one's job with integrity makes all the difference. He hesitated, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. I'll be staying in Fort Smith for a few days before returning to my ranch. There are supplies I need to purchase and matters I need to settle regarding the Harkers. Nora wasn't sure how to respond. Was he merely informing her of his plans, or was there something more to his statement? I wish you safe travels when you do return home, she said finally. Preston studied her face for a moment. Miss Nielsen, Nora, if I may, would you consider joining me for supper this evening, to properly thank you for your assistance? The invitation caught her completely off guard. Men didn't ask Nora Nielsen to supper, not respectable ranchers anyway. They either ignored her as a confirmed spinster or, like Mrs. Abernathy's nephew, were pushed toward her by well-meaning but meddling relatives. That's not necessary, she managed, feeling a flush rising to her cheeks. Necessary, no. Desired, yes. His blue eyes held her steadily. Unless, of course, there's someone who might object, a husband or no, she interrupted, then felt foolish for her quickness. That is, I'm not married. Something that looked suspiciously like pleasure flickered across Preston's face. "Then may I hope for the pleasure of your company? The hotel restaurant at 7. Nora knew she should refuse. It was improper for a single woman to dine alone with a man who wasn't family. But something about Preston Vaughn made her want to set aside propriety just this once. "Yes," she heard herself say. 7 o'clock. His smile was warm and genuine. "Until this evening, then." After Preston left, Nora sat at her desk, heart pounding inexplicably. What had she just agreed to? And more importantly, what would she wear? When she returned home that afternoon, Nora found herself rummaging through her wardrobe with uncharacteristic indecision. Her clothing was serviceable and neat, appropriate for her position at the courthouse, but none of it seemed right for a supper at the hotel restaurant, the finest establishment in Fort Smith. Going somewhere special? Her father asked from the doorway, eyebrows raised at the sight of dresses spread across her bed. Nora hesitated. "I've been invited to supper at the hotel." "Indeed." Edward's expression was curious but not disapproving. "May I ask by whom, Mr. Vaughn?" "The rancher whose case was dismissed today." Nora busied herself rehanging a brown serge dress that was obviously inappropriate. "It's merely a gesture of thanks for the court's assistance." "I see." Her father's tone suggested he saw more than she was admitting. "And you accepted this invitation?" Nora turned to face him directly. "Yes, I know it's not entirely proper, but—" Edward held up a hand, smiling slightly. "You're 30 years old, Nora, a grown woman with good judgment. If you wish to have supper with this rancher, I trust your reasons." He stepped into the room, examining the dresses on the bed. "What about the blue one? The one your mother made you for Easter 2 years ago. You've hardly worn it." Nora's eyes widened. The dress in question was the loveliest thing she owned: cornflower, blue silk with delicate embroidery at the cuffs and collar. She'd saved for months to buy the fabric, and her mother's old sewing patterns had guided her hands as she crafted it. But she'd had few occasions grand enough to warrant wearing it. "It's not too fine?" she asked uncertainly. Edward's eyes softened. "Your mother always said a woman should have at least one dress that makes her feel beautiful. I think tonight might be a good occasion for yours." At 6:30, Nora stood before her mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The blue dress fit perfectly, accentuating her slender waist and bringing out the rich chestnut tones in her hair, which she had arranged more elaborately than usual, with soft curls framing her face. She had even applied a touch of her mother's old rose-scented perfume to her wrists and neck. "You look lovely," Edward said as she came downstairs. "Every inch your mother's daughter." Nora smiled, touching the small cameo at her throat, another of her mother's treasures. "Thank you, Pa." "Would you like me to walk you to the hotel?" She considered the offer. It would be more proper to have her father escort her, but something inside rebelled at the idea. "No, thank you. It's still daylight and it's only 3 blocks." Edward nodded, understanding her desire for independence. "Enjoy your evening, Nora. Don't worry about the time. I trust you to make your own way home safely." The walk to the Grand Hotel was both too short and too long. Nora's thoughts raced ahead of her feet. What did Preston Vaughn truly want from her? Was this genuinely just a thank-you meal, or something more? And if it was more, what did she want it to be? The hotel lobby was elegant by Fort Smith standards, with polished wooden floors and brass fixtures gleaming in the lamplight. Nora had only been inside a few times, usually for official court functions. She paused at the entrance to the restaurant, suddenly self-conscious. "Miss Nielsen." Preston's voice came from behind her, and she turned to find him approaching from the direction of the hotel's front desk. He had transformed from the prisoner she'd met yesterday. Clean-shaven now, dressed in a well-fitted dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, He looked every inch the successful rancher. His dark hair was neatly combed, though one stubborn curl still fell across his forehead in a way Nora found inexplicably appealing. "Mr. Vaughn," she greeted him, suddenly nervous. "Preston, please." His eyes traveled appreciatively over her appearance. "You look beautiful. That shade of blue suits you perfectly." The compliment, delivered with such simple sincerity, warmed her. "Thank you." He offered his arm. "Shall we? I've arranged for a table." The restaurant was busy with hotel guests and Fort Smith's upper society. Nora felt eyes on them as Preston escorted her to a table near the windows overlooking the Arkansas River. She recognized Mrs. Abernathy among the diners, the woman's eyes widening in undisguised shock at the sight of Nora Nielsen in a fine dress on the arm of a handsome stranger. "It seems we're causing a stir," Preston noted quietly as he held her chair. "Fort Smith thrives on gossip," Nora replied, arranging her skirts. "By tomorrow, we'll be engaged in the stories they tell." Preston sat across from her, his eyes twinkling. Would that be so terrible? The boldness of the question caught her off guard, and she was saved from answering by the arrival of the waiter. Preston ordered for both of them after consulting her preferences, a courtesy Nora appreciated, as the menu prices would have given her pause. "Tell me about yourself," Preston said once they were alone again. "How did you come to work for Judge Parker's court?" Nora sipped her water, gathering her thoughts. "My mother died when I was 10. My father raised me alone, encouraged my education. I was fortunate he believed girls should learn as much as boys." She smiled at the memory. "When I finished school at 18, most girls my age were already married or preparing to marry, but I wanted something different. So you found the courthouse." "Not immediately. I tried teaching first, but the school board found me too independent-minded for influencing young children." Nora's lips quirked at the memory. Judge Parker had just been appointed to the court. He needed someone who could write clearly and keep organized records. "My former teacher recommended me." Preston nodded, genuinely interested. 8 years is a long time to serve in such a demanding position. You must be very good at what you do." "I try to be." Nora hesitated, then asked, "And you? How does a well-educated man end up ranching in the Cherokee Nation?" A shadow crossed Preston's face briefly. "My father was an attorney in St. Louis. He expected me to follow in his footsteps. I studied law, even practiced for 2 years, but found I couldn't stomach the compromises many lawyers make." He gazed out at the river. "When my mother died, I used my inheritance to buy land and cattle. The Cherokee Nation had just opened certain areas to non-Indian settlement through marriage or business partnerships." "So you have Cherokee partners?" "Yes, the Wolf family, good people who have taught me much about the land." Preston's expression grew serious. "That's partly why the Harkers targeted me. My water rights flow through what was once Cherokee territory. They think because I partner with Indians, I'll be an easy target." Their food arrived tender beef steaks with seasonal vegetables and fresh bread. Nora was surprised to find herself hungry despite her nerves. They ate in comfortable conversation, discovering mutual interests in books and music. Preston had traveled extensively before settling in Indian Territory, and his stories of Chicago, New York, and even a brief journey to England fascinated her. "Have you ever wanted to leave Fort Smith?" he asked as they lingered over coffee and apple pie. Nora considered the question. "Sometimes. I've read about San Francisco, Boston, even Paris, places where women are beginning to find more opportunities." "You'd thrive in such places," Preston said with certainty. "Your intelligence and determination would serve you well." "Perhaps, but my father is here. His forge, his livelihood. I couldn't leave him alone." Preston studied her face. It's admirable, your devotion to family. Too rare these days. Their conversation continued as darkness fell outside the windows. Nora was startled when the waiter came to inform them that the restaurant would be closing soon. She hadn't realized how late it had grown, or how completely she'd lost herself in conversation with this man she'd only just met. "I should get home," she said reluctantly. "My father will worry." Preston paid the bill and helped her with her shawl. "Allow me to escort you." The night air had cooled pleasantly after the day's heat. Stars scattered across the sky above them as they walked slowly through Fort Smith's quiet streets. Preston offered his arm again, and Nora took it, aware of the solid strength beneath her fingertips. "I've enjoyed this evening immensely," Preston said as they turned onto her street. "More than I can express." "As have I," Nora admitted. "It's been refreshing to have a conversation that doesn't revolve around my spinsterhood." Preston stopped walking, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his expression was serious. "May I speak plainly, Nora?" Her heart quickened at his tone. "Yes. I find you remarkable. Your intelligence, your independence, your quiet strength, these are qualities to be admired, not criticized." His voice lowered. "This town may see an unmarried woman of 30 as something to pity. I see a woman who refused to settle for less than she deserves." Nora swallowed hard, emotion tightening her throat. No one had ever spoken to her this way before. "You hardly know me." "I know enough." He took her hand gently. "I'll be in Fort Smith for another 3 days before I return to my ranch. Would you allow me to see you again tomorrow? Perhaps show me the town through your eyes." She knew she should be cautious, that whirlwind courtships were the stuff of dime novels, not real life. But something about Preston Vaughn called to her in a way no man ever had. "Yes," she said simply. "I'd like that." He smiled, lifting her hand to his lips for a brief, proper kiss that nonetheless sent warmth spiraling through her. "Until tomorrow, then. Good night, Nora." "Good night, Preston." She watched him walk away before entering her home, where a single lamp burned in the front room. Her father had fallen asleep in his chair, a book open on his lap. Nora gently woke him. "You're back," he said groggily. "How was your evening?" Nora helped him to his feet, smiling. "It was unexpected." The next morning, Nora dressed with particular care before heading to the courthouse. Judge Parker raised an eyebrow at her request for the afternoon off, her first in over a year, but granted it without question. Preston was waiting outside at noon, looking handsome in more casual attire, dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a vest. His smile when he saw her made Nora's heart flutter embarrassingly. "Where shall we begin our tour?" he asked, offering his arm. Nora showed him Fort Smith, beyond the main streets, the lovely park by the river, the small bookshop tucked away on a side street where she spent many happy hours, the bakery that made the best cinnamon rolls west of the Mississippi. Preston seemed genuinely interested in everything she shared, asking thoughtful questions and listening intently to her answers. They stopped for lemonade at a small cafe, sitting at an outdoor table beneath a striped awning. The day was warm but not unpleasant, with a gentle breeze stirring the air. "Tell me about your ranch," Nora said, curious about the life he'd built. Pride filled Preston's voice as he described the operation: 50 acres of good grazing land, a creek running through the property, a modest but solid house he'd expanded himself. "It's peaceful there. Sometimes when I ride out at dawn, with mist rising off the creek and deer grazing in the meadow, I think there can't be a more beautiful place on earth." "It sounds wonderful," Nora said, trying to picture it. "It is." Preston hesitated. "Though I've been thinking lately that something's missing." "What?" His eyes held hers steadily. "Someone to share it with." The simple statement hung between them, loaded with meaning. Nora looked down at her lemonade, uncertain how to respond. I apologize if that was too forward, Preston said after a moment. No, it's not that. Nora gathered her courage. It's just, Fort Smith has certain ideas about me. I'm the spinster court clerk. The woman too particular or too plain or too something to catch a husband. They've been saying it for years, and I've pretended not to care. But you do care, Preston said gently. Sometimes. Not about being unmarried exactly, but about being judged for it. She looked up at him. Why are you showing such interest in me, Preston? There are younger women, prettier women. Stop. His voice was firm but kind. I'm not interested in those other women. I'm interested in you, the woman whose intelligence shines in her eyes, whose courage shows in her independence, whose beauty takes my breath away when she doesn't even realize it. Nora felt warmth bloom in her chest at his words. You hardly know me, she repeated from the night before. Then let me know you better. He reached across the table, taking her hand. Come riding with me tomorrow. There's a beautiful spot by the river just outside town. We can have a picnic, talk more. She should have hesitated, should have considered propriety and reputation, and all the things a respectable woman must think about. Instead, she found herself nodding. I'd like that very much. The remainder of the afternoon passed too quickly. They walked through town, talking and laughing, stopping to examine interesting shop windows or greet people Nora knew. She was acutely aware of the curious glances they attracted the town spinster and the handsome stranger, but for once, she didn't care. When Preston escorted her home in the late afternoon, Edward was working in the small garden behind their house. He straightened as they approached, wiping his hands on his trousers. Pa, this is Preston Vaughn, Nora said. Preston, my father, Edward Nielsen. The two men sized each other up for a moment before Edward extended his hand. The rancher from the Nations. Heard your case was dismissed. Yes, sir, thanks in part to the efficient workings of Judge Parker's court. Preston's grip was firm as they shook hands. You have a remarkable daughter, Mr. Nielsen. Edward's expression softened slightly. I've always thought so. He looked between them. Will you stay for supper, Mr. Vaughn? The invitation surprised Nora, but Preston accepted graciously. The evening that followed was pleasant beyond her expectations. Preston helped Edward with the final garden tasks while Nora prepared a simple meal. Over supper, the two men discussed everything from horseshoes to politics, finding common ground despite their different backgrounds. Later, as Preston prepared to leave, Edward excused himself tactfully, saying he needed to review some forge orders in his study. At the front door, Preston took both Nora's hands in his. Thank you for today, for sharing your Fort Smith with me. Thank you for wanting to see it, she replied, suddenly shy under his intense gaze. Tomorrow, for our ride, I'll bring horses and a picnic. Yes, I'll be ready at noon. He hesitated, then leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he placed a gentle kiss on her cheek, his lips warm against her skin. Good night, Nora Nielsen, he murmured before stepping back. Good night, Preston Vaughn, she whispered, watching him disappear into the darkness. The next day dawned clear and perfect, as if nature itself approved of their plans. Nora chose a practical riding skirt and jacket, but took extra care with her hair and added a touch of color to her lips. At precisely noon, the sound of hoofbeats announced Preston's arrival. He rode a magnificent chestnut stallion and led a gentle-looking bay mare. Dressed in typical rancher-attire denim trousers, chambray shirt, and a well-worn hat, he looked even more handsome than in his formal clothes. You ride, I hope, he called as she came out to meet him. Since childhood, Nora confirmed, approaching the mare. My father thought every girl should know how, Preston grinned. Another reason to admire Edward Nielsen. He helped her mount, his hands strong and sure at her waist, the touch brief as it was, sent a flutter through her stomach. Once she was settled, he handed her the reins before mounting his own horse with easy grace. They rode at a leisurely pace through town, and then out along the river road. The day was beautiful, sunny but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers. Preston was an attentive companion, pointing out interesting sights and matching his horse's pace perfectly to hers. About an hour outside Fort Smith, they reached a lovely clearing beside the Arkansas River. Massive oak trees provided dappled shade, and the river flowed peacefully, glittering in the sunlight. "This is beautiful," Nora said as Preston helped her dismount. "I found it yesterday while exploring." He secured the horses to a nearby tree before retrieving a basket and blanket from his saddlebag. "I thought you might appreciate the view." They spread the blanket beneath the largest oak. The picnic Preston had brought was simple but delicious: cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, apples, and a bottle of sweet cider. They ate in comfortable conversation, talking about books they'd read and places they'd like to visit. After they'd finished eating, Preston leaned back against the tree trunk, watching the river flow. "May I ask you something personal, Nora?" She nodded, curious. "Why have you never married? Truly, a woman as remarkable as you must have had offers." Nora considered the question, which would have seemed impertinent from anyone else but felt natural coming from him. "There were two," she admitted. "The first when I was 20, the son of my father's friend. A nice enough man, but we had nothing in common. He wanted a wife to keep house and raise children, not one with opinions about literature and politics. And the second, a widower with 3 small children. He needed a mother for his children more than a wife for himself." Nora plucked a blade of grass, twirling it between her fingers. "I couldn't marry without love, without that sense that the person sees me, truly sees me. It seemed better to remain single than to bind myself to someone who wanted a generic wife rather than me specifically." Preston's eyes were warm as they held hers. "A wise choice." "And you?" she asked. "You must be." She hesitated, realizing she didn't know his age. 34, he supplied. "And yes, there was someone once, Catherine. We were engaged briefly in St. Louis." "What happened?" A shadow crossed his face. "She preferred the life of a city attorney's wife to that of a rancher's. When I decided to leave St. Louis, she chose not to come with me." "I'm sorry," Nora said sincerely. Preston shrugged. "It was for the best. She would have been miserable on the ranch, and I would have been miserable trying to make her happy." His expression lightened. "Like you, I decided it was better to wait for the right person than to settle for the wrong one." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had chosen similar paths, despite societal pressure. The afternoon passed in a haze of pleasant conversation and companionable silences. They walked along the riverbank, skipped stones across the water, and simply enjoyed each other's company. Nora couldn't remember when she had last felt so at ease with another person, so free to be herself without judgment. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, they reluctantly packed up the picnic and prepared to return to Fort Smith. The ride back was quieter, both lost in their thoughts as the landscape passed by in the golden light of late afternoon. When they reached Nora's home, Preston helped her dismount, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "I've had a wonderful day," he said softly. "As have I," Nora replied, looking up at him. A strand of her hair had come loose during the ride. Preston reached out, gently tucking it behind her ear, his fingers brushing her cheek. He hesitated, seeming unusually uncertain. "Yes," she prompted, her heart beating faster. "I leave tomorrow," he said finally. "Back to my ranch. There are matters I need to attend to: the Harkers' threats, my cattle, my responsibilities to my Cherokee partners. Disappointment washed through her, though she knew his departure had always been inevitable. Of course. You have a life to return to. A life I've been completely content with until now. His eyes searched hers. But these past 3 days with you, they've changed something in me, Nora. I find myself reluctant to leave Fort Smith for the first time since I arrived. Hope flickered in her chest. Preston, would you have dinner with me tonight? He interrupted. One last evening before I go. There's more I want to say to you, but I need a little more time to find the right words. Yes, she said without hesitation. What time shall I expect you? 7 at the hotel again. Nora nodded, already anticipating the evening ahead. I'll be ready. Preston's smile was warm as he mounted his horse again. Until tonight, then. The blue dress again, Nora decided as she prepared for dinner. It had brought her luck before, and tonight, their last night, she wanted everything to be perfect. Her father helped fasten her mother's cameo at her throat, his eyes suspiciously moist. You look beautiful, Nora, he said, stepping back to appraise her. Truly beautiful. Thank you, Pa. She smoothed the silk nervously. I don't know why I'm so anxious, it's just dinner. Edward gave her a knowing look. Is it? 3 days you've spent with this man, 3 days of smiles I haven't seen from you in years. Nora flushed. He's different, he sees me, Pa. Not as a spinster or a curiosity, but as a person. The way a man should see a woman he cares for. Edward squeezed her shoulder gently. I like him, Nora. He has substance, character. He's leaving tomorrow, she reminded him, trying to keep the sadness from her voice. Is he? Her father's tone was enigmatic. We shall see. Before Nora could question his meaning, there was a knock at the door. Preston stood on their porch, even more handsome than the previous evening in his formal attire. His eyes widened appreciatively at the sight of her. You look exquisite, he said, his voice low and sincere. Thank you. Nora turned to her father. We won't be late, Pa. Edward waved them off. Enjoy your evening. Don't worry about the time. The walk to the hotel was charged with an energy that hadn't been present before: anticipation, perhaps, or the knowledge that tomorrow would bring separation. Preston's hand rested lightly at the small of her back as they entered the restaurant, a touch both protective and possessive that Nora found she didn't mind at all. Their table was the same as before, overlooking the river. Candles flickered between them, casting a warm glow across the white tablecloth. They ordered their meal, but Nora found her appetite diminished by the butterflies in her stomach. You're quiet tonight, Preston observed after their soup was served. I'm savoring the moment, she admitted. Tomorrow you'll be gone and Fort Smith will return to normal. Something flashed in his eyes: determination, perhaps. Nora, there's something I need to tell you, something important. She set down her spoon, heart suddenly racing. Yes, Preston reached across the table, taking her hand in his. These past 3 days have been the most unexpected gift. I came to Fort Smith facing prison, possibly even the gallows, and instead I found. He paused, seeming to search for the right word. I found you. Nora's throat tightened with emotion. Preston, please let me finish. His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. I've lived alone for years, convinced myself I was content with my books and my land and my horses for company. But being with you has awakened something I thought long buried: the desire for companionship, for partnership, for love. The last word hung in the air between them, shimmering with possibility. Nora could scarcely breathe. I know this seems sudden, Preston continued, his voice low and intense. 3 days is nothing in the grand scheme of a lifetime. But sometimes, Nora, sometimes you just know when something is right. He squeezed her hand gently. I have to return to my ranch tomorrow, but I don't want this whatever is growing between us to end." "What are you suggesting?" Nora whispered, hardly daring to hope. "Come visit me," he said earnestly. "In a month's time, when I've dealt with the Harkers and ensured the ranch is secure. Come stay for a week, meet my partners, see the land I love. Let me court you properly, Nora Nielsen, as you deserve to be courted." It was both more and less than she had expected. Not a declaration of undying love or an impulsive proposal, but something perhaps more valuable, an invitation to explore what might grow between them, given time and nurturing. "Your father would be welcome too, of course," Preston added quickly. "I wouldn't ask you to travel alone or compromise your reputation." Nora's mind raced with the implications, the possibilities. A week away from Fort Smith, away from the whispers and judgments. A week to discover if what she felt for Preston was real or merely the excitement of something new. "Yes," she said finally, her decision made. "I would like that very much." The smile that broke across Preston's face was brilliant. "You would?" "I would." Nora felt suddenly, inexplicably happy. "My father has a capable assistant at the forge who could manage for a week. And Judge Parker owes me time after 8 years of dedicated service." "A month, then." Preston lifted her hand to his lips, placing a kiss on her knuckles that sent warmth spiraling through her. "The first week of September. The weather will be perfect, not too hot, not yet cold. The wildflowers will still be blooming in the meadows." Their meal arrived, and they ate with renewed appetite, making plans for her visit, talking about all the things Preston wanted to show her. The evening passed in a glow of happiness and anticipation, the impending separation made bearable by the promise of reunion. After dinner, they walked slowly through Fort Smith, reluctant for the night to end. When they reached Nora's house, Preston turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "I'll leave at dawn," he said quietly. "But I'll write to you, Nora, every week until we meet again." "I'll look forward to your letters," she replied, surprised by the depth of emotion in her voice. "And I'll write back, telling you all the mundane details of Fort Smith that you'll surely miss terribly." He chuckled, then grew serious again. His hands released hers to frame her face gently. "May I kiss you good night, Nora Nielsen? A proper kiss this time." Her heart skipped a beat at the request. At 30, Nora had been kissed before chaste, awkward affairs that had left her wondering what all the fuss was about. But something told her a kiss from Preston Vaughn would be entirely different. "Yes," she whispered, tilting her face up to his. Preston's lips touched her softly at first, a gentle exploration that quickly deepened as Nora responded. His arms slipped around her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss became more passionate. Nora's hands found their way to his shoulders, steadying herself against the unexpected wave of desire that washed through her. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. Preston rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. "I've wanted to do that since the moment I saw you in the courthouse," he confessed, his voice husky. "Even through the jail cell bars," Nora teased gently. He laughed, opening his eyes to gaze down at her with undisguised affection. "Even then." "Perhaps especially then, when you were all business and propriety, but with compassion in your eyes." Preston stepped back reluctantly, though he kept hold of one of her hands. "I should go. Dawn comes early and I have a long ride ahead." "Be safe," Nora said, suddenly concerned about his journey home. "The Harkers, don't worry about them. They're cowards at heart, only dangerous when they have the law on their side." He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I'll be fine, and in a month you'll see for yourself." "A month," she echoed. It seemed both too long and too short a time. Preston kissed her once more, briefly but with no less feeling than before. Good night, Nora. Dream of Oklahoma territory and open skies and a man who can't wait to show them to you. Good night, Preston. Safe travels. She watched from the porch as he walked away, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. Only when he was completely out of sight did Nora enter her home, touching her fingers to lips that still tingled from his kiss. Edward looked up from his book as she entered the sitting room, his eyebrows rising at what must have been a telling expression on her face. "Good evening." "Very good," she confirmed, sinking into the chair opposite him. "Pa, how would you feel about taking a trip to Oklahoma territory in September? To visit Preston's ranch?" Her father's smile was knowing. "I think that could be arranged. My assistant can mind the forge for a week." "You're not surprised?" Edward closed his book, his expression thoughtful. "Nora, I've watched you these past 3 days. I've seen how you look at him, how he looks at you. Some things develop slowly over years. Others strike like lightning." He leaned forward, patting her hand. "Your mother and I knew within a week that we would marry. When it's right, it's right." Nora's chest tightened with emotion. "I hardly know what I'm feeling, Pa. It's all happened so quickly." "Then this visit will give you time to find out." Edward's eyes were kind. "And if what you find is something worth keeping, well, Oklahoma territory isn't so very far from Fort Smith." The implications of his words that she might someday leave Fort Smith for good hung in the air between them. But rather than sadness, Nora felt a strange sense of possibility opening before her, like a door to a room she hadn't known existed. "Thank you, Pa," she said softly, "for understanding." The month that followed Preston's departure was simultaneously the longest and shortest of Nora's life. True to his word, he wrote to her weekly long, thoughtful letters that spoke of his daily activities, the beauty of his land, and his growing feelings for her. Nora treasured each one, reading and rereading them until the pages grew soft from handling. In return, she wrote to him of her work at the courthouse, amusing stories about Fort Smith citizens and her own developing emotions. Writing to Preston was different from writing official court documents, more personal, more revealing. Through their correspondence, Nora felt their connection deepening despite the physical distance between them. Of course, Fort Smith noticed the change in Nora Nielsen. The regular arrival of letters addressed in a masculine hand, her frequent smiles, the spring in her step, all were subject to speculation and gossip. Some of it was kind, some less so. "I heard she's corresponding with that rancher from the Nations, Mrs. Abernathy said loudly enough for Nora to overhear one day at the general store. A man who was nearly tried for cattle rustling. Imagine the desperation. Nora, who once would have blushed and hurried away from such comments, instead turned calmly to face the older woman. "Mr. Vaughn was falsely accused and completely exonerated, Mrs. Abernathy. And yes, we are corresponding. He is a gentleman of excellent character whom I admire greatly." Mrs. Abernathy's mouth fell open at the direct response, and Nora continued her shopping with her head held high. It was a small moment, but significant, the first time she had publicly acknowledged her relationship with Preston and defended it without shame. As September approached, Nora and her father made preparations for their journey. Judge Parker generously granted her the week's leave, expressing genuine pleasure at her happiness. "You've earned some joy, Miss Nielsen," he told her. "And from what I observed of Mr. Vaughn, he seems a man worthy of providing it." The morning of their departure dawned clear and mild, perfect traveling weather. Preston had arranged for them to be met at the Fort Smith station by a neighbor who would drive them the remaining distance to his ranch. The train journey would take most of the day, delivering them to the small settlement nearest his property by late afternoon. Nora wore her most practical traveling outfit, a sturdy skirt and jacket in a deep green that complemented her chestnut hair. Her stomach fluttered with nerves and excitement as she and her father boarded the train, finding their seats in the passenger car. "Second thoughts?" Edward asked quietly as the train lurched into motion. Nora shook her head, watching Fort Smith begin to recede through the window. "No." "Nervous but not doubtful. Good." Her father patted her hand. "Adventure suits you, daughter." The journey passed pleasantly enough. Nora had brought one of Preston's letters to reread. Smiling at his description of preparations for their visit, the guest rooms being aired, special meals planned, rides mapped out to show them his favorite parts of the territory. By late afternoon, they arrived at Tahlequah Station, a small but busy outpost serving the Cherokee Nation capital. Nora's heart raced as she and Edward descended from the train, scanning the platform for their arranged transportation. "Miss Nielsen, Mr. Nielsen." The voice came from a tall Cherokee man standing beside a wagon at the end of the platform. He approached them with a friendly smile. "I'm Joseph Wolfe. Preston sent me to fetch you." "Thank you for meeting us, Mr. Wolfe," Nora replied, trying to hide her disappointment that Preston hadn't come himself. Joseph seemed to read her thoughts. Preston wanted to come, but a last-minute issue with a fence line kept him at the ranch. "He's eager to see you, hasn't talked of much else for weeks." His dark eyes twinkled with amusement. "My sister says she's never seen him so particular about the house being just so." This information pleased Nora immensely as they loaded their luggage into the wagon. Joseph proved to be excellent company during the hour-long ride to Preston's ranch, telling them about the area's history and pointing out landmarks along the way. "That's Vaughn land beginning at that creek," Joseph said finally, gesturing ahead. 500 acres, some of the best grazing land in the territory. Nora leaned forward, eager for her first glimpse of Preston's home. The property was beautiful rolling hills covered with lush grass, stands of trees providing shade, and a clear creek winding through it all. Cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, and wildflowers dotted the meadows just as Preston had described. As they crested a hill, the ranch house came into view, a substantial two-story structure of weathered wood with a wide porch wrapping around it. Smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, and several outbuildings, a barn, stable, and what appeared to be a bunkhouse stood nearby. And there, standing on the porch steps watching their approach, was Preston. Nora's heart leaped at the sight of him. He looked even more handsome than she remembered, dressed in work clothes with his sleeves rolled up and his dark hair slightly tousled. As Joseph brought the wagon to a halt in the yard, Preston strode forward, his face alight with joy. "You're here," he said, his voice warm with welcome as he helped Nora down from the wagon. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, his eyes drinking in the sight of her. The journey was comfortable. "Very," she assured him, suddenly shy in his presence after a month apart. Preston turned to greet Edward, the two men shaking hands with genuine pleasure. "Welcome to my home, Mr. Nielsen. I hope you'll find everything to your satisfaction." "Impressive place you've got here, Vaughn," Edward replied approvingly, looking around the well-maintained property. "Thank you. I've worked hard to make it prosper." Preston's gaze returned to Nora, his expression softening. "Let me show you inside. You must be tired from your journey." The interior of the ranch house was a pleasant surprise. Though masculine in its furnishings, it was clean and comfortable, with good quality furniture and personal touches that spoke of Preston's refined tastes. Bookshelves filled with volumes, a piano in the corner of the sitting room, landscape paintings on the walls. "This is lovely," Nora said honestly, turning to take it all in. Preston looked pleased. "It's been a bachelor's home for too long, but I've done my best with it." He gestured toward the staircase. "Let me show you to your rooms. You can rest and refresh yourselves before dinner." He led them upstairs to two adjacent guest rooms, each comfortably appointed with soft beds, washstands, and windows overlooking the property. "I hope you'll be comfortable here," he said. "Dinner will be ready in about an hour, nothing fancy, but Sarah Wolfe, Joseph's wife, is an excellent cook. She helps around the house a few days each week." Left alone in her room, Nora moved to the window, gazing out at the land that Preston loved. It was beautiful, wilder, and more open than the areas around Fort Smith, with a sense of freedom and possibility that called to something deep within her. After washing away the dust of travel and changing into a fresh dress, a pretty blue and white striped cotton that brought out the color of her eyes, Nora went back downstairs to find Preston and her father already in conversation in the sitting room. They stood as she entered, and the appreciative look in Preston's eyes as he took in her appearance sent a flush of pleasure through her. Dinner was served in a comfortable dining room, the table set with simple but good quality china. Sarah Wolfe had prepared a delicious meal of roasted chicken, fresh vegetables from Preston's garden, and warm bread. The conversation flowed easily, with Preston asking Edward about his blacksmithing and telling stories about ranch life that had both Nora and her father laughing. "Tomorrow, if you're not too tired, I thought I might show you the property," Preston said as they lingered over coffee and apple pie. "There's a particularly beautiful spot by the creek that I think you'd enjoy, Nora." "I'd like that very much," she replied, meeting his eyes across the table. Edward cleared his throat. "Well, this old man is ready to turn in. That train journey took more out of me than I expected." He stood, nodding to Preston. "Thank you for your hospitality, Vaughn. Excellent meal. Sleep well, Mr. Nielsen. Breakfast is whenever you're ready in the morning, no fixed time here on the ranch." After Edward had gone upstairs, Preston turned to Nora. "Would you like to sit on the porch for a while? The evenings are beautiful here, stars like you've never seen." They settled into two rocking chairs on the porch, a lantern providing soft illumination. The night was peaceful, with chirping crickets and the occasional distant lowing of cattle. Above them, the sky was indeed spectacular, a vast expanse of darkness studded with countless stars. "It's beautiful," Nora said softly, gazing upward. "So different from Fort Smith." "One of the things I love most about living here," Preston replied, "the sense of space, of endless possibility." He looked over at her, his expression thoughtful in the lantern light. "I've missed you, Nora. Letters are poor substitutes for your company." "I've missed you too." The admission came easily in the darkness. "Fort Smith seemed smaller after you left." Preston's hand found hers on the arm of the chair, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I was afraid, you know." "Of what?" "That what happened between us was simply the excitement of the moment. That once I returned here, once you went back to your life, whatever connection we'd formed might fade." Nora squeezed his hand. "Did it, for you?" "No." His voice was firm. "If anything, it grew stronger with distance. Each letter you sent, I came to know you better, to admire you more." "It was the same for me," Nora admitted. "I found myself thinking of you at odd moments, wondering what you would think about things that happened during my day." Preston was silent for a moment, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of her hand. "Nora, I need to be honest with you." Her heart skipped nervously. "About what?" "About my intentions." He turned in his chair to face her directly. "I didn't invite you here simply for a visit, though I'm delighted to show you my home. I invited you because I needed to know if what I felt in Fort Smith was real, if you could see yourself here in this place with me." Nora's breath caught in her throat. "Preston, I'm not proposing. Not yet." His voice was gentle but serious. That would be too soon, I know. But I want you to understand that's where my heart is heading. I care for you deeply, Nora, more than I thought possible after such a brief acquaintance. The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. I feel the same way, she said softly. It's unexpected and a little frightening how quickly this has happened. But being here, seeing your home, meeting the people who matter to you, it helps make it more real. Preston lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Then let's take this week to discover more about each other, to see if what we feel can flourish here as it did in Fort Smith. No pressure, no rush, just honest exploration of what might be. I'd like that, Nora agreed, feeling a profound sense of rightness settle over her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the stars and enjoying each other's presence. When Nora finally rose to go inside, Preston walked her to the foot of the stairs. "Sleep well," he said, brushing a light kiss across her lips. "Tomorrow I'll show you my world." The week that followed was among the happiest of Nora's life. True to his word, Preston showed her every aspect of his ranch and the surrounding territory. They rode across his land, picnicked by the creek, visited the nearby Cherokee settlement where the Wolf family lived, and spent evenings on the porch talking until the stars faded. Edward, seeing his daughter's happiness, often made himself scarce, claiming a need to rest or an interest in some aspect of the ranch operations that conveniently allowed Nora and Preston time alone together. On their fourth day, Preston took Nora to a special place on his property, a small rise overlooking a meadow filled with late-blooming wildflowers, with the creek winding through it and distant mountains visible on the horizon. "This is my favorite spot on the ranch," he told her as they dismounted. "Whenever I need to think, or when a decision weighs heavily on me, I come here." Nora understood why immediately. There was a peaceful energy to the place, a sense of perspective that came from seeing so much beauty spread before you. "It's perfect," she said, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. Preston spread a blanket on the ground and they sat together, sharing the lunch Sarah had packed for them. The day was mild, with a gentle breeze stirring the tall grass around them. "Could you see yourself here, Nora?" Preston asked suddenly, his voice quiet but intent. "Not just visiting, but living, making a life." The directness of the question didn't surprise her. They had been moving toward this conversation all week, drawing closer with each shared experience, each intimate discussion. "I can," she answered honestly, "more easily than I would have imagined a month ago." She looked out over the meadow, gathering her thoughts. "I love my work in Fort Smith, the purpose it gives me, but I've realized this week that purpose can be found in many places, many ways." Preston nodded, understanding in his eyes. "The ranch needs good management, records kept, correspondence handled, accounts balanced, skills not unlike those you use at the courthouse." "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Vaughn?" Nora teased gently. His smile was warm. "I'm offering you a partnership, Miss Nielsen, in every sense of the word." The implication was clear, though he still hadn't formally proposed. Nora's heart raced at the thought of what he was suggesting, a complete change of life, leaving the familiar world of Fort Smith for this new frontier. And yet the prospect filled her with excitement rather than fear. "What about my father?" she asked, the one concern that weighed on her mind. "He's been alone once before, after my mother died. I couldn't bear to leave him that way again." Preston took her hand, his expression serious. "I've spoken with Edward about that. Yesterday, while you were visiting with Sarah." Nora's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You have?" "I wanted his blessing before speaking to you about a future together." Preston's thumb traced circles on her palm, a gesture that had become familiar and comforting. "I asked if he would consider relocating as well, if things between us progressed as I hope they will." There's a growing settlement nearby that needs a skilled blacksmith. The house has plenty of room, or we could build him a place of his own on the property if he preferred. Tears pricked at Nora's eyes at his thoughtfulness. And what did he say? He said his daughter's happiness means more to him than any forge, and that he's not so old that he can't start fresh in a new place. Preston's smile was gentle. He also said that he's been watching us all week and has never seen you so alive. It was true, Nora realized. Something had awakened in her here, a sense of possibility, of a future different from the one she had resigned herself to in Fort Smith. "Preston," she began, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. He put a finger to her lips, silencing her gently. "Not yet. When I ask you the question that's in my heart, I want it to be perfect, special, and I want you to have no doubts about your answer." He replaced his finger with a soft kiss. "Let's enjoy the rest of your visit first. Then, before you leave, we'll talk about what comes next." Nora nodded, understanding his desire to not rush what was developing between them, even as she felt increasingly certain of her own feelings. The remaining days passed in a blur of happiness. Nora met more of Preston's neighbors, including several Cherokee families who had formed close friendships with him. She helped Sarah in the kitchen, learning recipes adapted to territory living. She even tried her hand at some of the ranch chores, discovering a satisfaction in the physical work that surprised her. Throughout it all, her connection with Preston deepened. Each conversation revealed more common ground, each shared experience strengthened the bond between them. By the final evening of their visit, Nora knew with certainty that what had begun in Fort Smith had grown into something true and lasting, something worth changing her life for. After dinner on their last night, Preston suggested a walk. The evening was mild, with a full moon illuminating the landscape in silver light. They strolled hand in hand away from the house, toward the creek that marked the boundary of Preston's property. "I can't believe you leave tomorrow," Preston said, his voice tinged with sadness. "The ranch will seem empty without you." "We don't have to say goodbye for long," Nora replied. "Whatever happens next, I know I want to see you again soon." Preston stopped walking, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his features were cast in dramatic shadows, his eyes bright with emotion. "Nora, I had a plan. A perfect moment I wanted to create for this. But standing here with you now, I can't wait any longer." Her heart began to race as he took both her hands in his. "Preston, when I first saw you in the courthouse, even through those jail cell bars, something inside me recognized you not just as a beautiful woman, but as someone important, someone I needed to know." His voice was low and intense. "These past weeks, getting to know you through letters and now here at my home, have only confirmed what I felt from the beginning." Preston reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. Nora's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "It was my grandmother's," he explained, his voice slightly unsteady. "I had it sent from St. Louis after I returned from Fort Smith. I knew then what I was hoping for." He lowered himself to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Nora Nielsen, I know this has happened quickly between us. Some would say too quickly, but I believe some souls recognize each other instantly, across time and distance. Mine recognized yours." Tears blurred Nora's vision as he continued, his voice growing more confident. "I love you, Nora. Your intelligence, your strength, your gentle heart. I love the way you challenge me, the way you see the world, the way you've opened yourself to this place that means so much to me." Preston's eyes held hers steadily. "I want to build a life with you here, or wherever our path leads us. I want to wake each morning with you beside me and face whatever the day brings together." He took a deep breath. "Will you marry me, Nora?" Will you be my partner, my confidante? My love for all the days were granted. Nora had imagined this moment many times over the years, not with Preston specifically, but the abstract notion of a proposal. In her imagination, she had always weighed the question carefully, considered all angles before responding. But now, looking down at this man who had entered her life so unexpectedly and transformed it so completely, she found no hesitation within her heart. "Yes," she said, her voice strong despite the tears on her cheeks. "Yes, Preston Vaughn, I will marry you." Joy blazed across his face as he stood, slipping the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. Preston pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of promise and passion and future. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "You've made me the happiest man in the territory." "And I'm the happiest woman," Nora replied, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain all she felt. "Though we should probably tell my father before we get too carried away with our happiness." Preston grinned, taking her hand. "Edward already knows my intentions. But yes, let's go share the news." They walked back to the house hand in hand, the moon lighting their way. Edward was sitting on the porch, smoking his pipe, a knowing smile spreading across his face as they approached. "I take it congratulations are in order," he said, rising to his feet. Nora held out her hand, showing the ring that glinted in the lantern light. "You knew this was coming tonight." "Had my suspicions," Edward admitted, embracing his daughter warmly before shaking Preston's hand. "You have my blessing, both of you. And my heartfelt wishes for a lifetime of happiness together." They spent the next hour on the porch making plans not just for the wedding, but for the life that would follow. It was decided that Nora would return to Fort Smith with her father to give proper notice at the courthouse and make arrangements for their relocation. Preston would follow in a month's time, and they would be married in Fort Smith, allowing Nora's friends and colleagues to attend. And then? Preston asked, his eyes never leaving Nora's face. "Back here to start our life together." "Home," Nora agreed, the word taking on new meaning. Not Fort Smith, where she had lived all her life, but this place that had captured her heart as surely as the man beside her had. The journey back to Fort Smith the next day was bittersweet, sad to leave Preston, but filled with excitement for the future they would build together. The weight of the ring on her finger was a constant reminder of the transformation her life had undergone in just over a month. As the train pulled into Fort Smith Station, Nora took a deep breath, preparing herself for the reactions her news would provoke. Some would be genuinely happy for her. Others would be skeptical or judgmental about the whirlwind nature of her engagement. But for the first time in her life, Nora found she didn't care what others thought. She knew her own heart, and that was enough. Judge Parker was gracious about her resignation, offering sincere congratulations and promising to attend the wedding. Her colleagues at the courthouse were surprised, but mostly supportive, though some expressed concern about her moving to Indian Territory with a man she'd known such a short time. The wider town reaction was exactly as Nora had anticipated, a mixture of genuine well wishes, thinly veiled envy, and outright skepticism. Mrs. Abernathy, in particular, made her opinion known. "Engaged to that rancher!" she exclaimed when Nora shared her news at the general store. "My dear, you've known him barely a month, and to move to that wilderness, it seems a desperate decision." In the past, such comments would have stung Nora deeply, but now, secure in her choice and her future, she merely smiled. "Not desperate at all, Mrs. Abernathy, quite the opposite. I've been waiting 30 years for the right man for Preston. Some people find love quickly, others take longer, but when it's right, you know it." The older woman's mouth tightened, but before she could respond, another voice joined the conversation. "Well, I think it's wonderful," said Mrs. Reynolds, the milliner. "My Harold proposed to me after 2 weeks, and we've been happily married for 32 years. She patted Nora's hand warmly. "When you know, you know." Over the next month, Nora and her father prepared for their move. The house in Fort Smith was put up for sale. Possessions were sorted and packed. Arrangements were made for transporting Edward's blacksmithing equipment. Through it all, Preston's letters continued to arrive, full of plans for their future and expressions of love that made Nora's heart swell with happiness. True to his word, Preston arrived in Fort Smith 4 weeks later. The reunion at the station was joyous, with Nora rushing into his arms the moment he stepped off the train, regardless of who might be watching. "I've missed you," he murmured against her hair, holding her tightly. "Every day." "And I you," she replied, drawing back to look at him. "But soon we won't have to be apart again." The wedding was set for the following Saturday. Judge Parker had offered the use of his home for the ceremony, a generous gesture that touched Nora deeply. The guest list was small but significant: colleagues from the courthouse, a few close friends, and even some of Preston's Cherokee partners who had traveled from the territory for the occasion. On her wedding morning, Nora stood before the mirror in her childhood bedroom, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. She wore a gown of ivory silk, simple but elegant, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was arranged in a sophisticated style adorned with small white flowers, and her mother's cameo hung at her throat. A knock at the door preceded her father's entrance. Edward stopped in the doorway, his eyes filling with tears as he beheld his daughter. "You look just like your mother on our wedding day," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She would be so proud of the woman you've become, Nora." "I wish she could be here," Nora replied softly. "She is, in a way." Edward approached, taking her hands in his. "In your strength, your kindness, your courage to follow your heart." He smiled through his tears. "And she would approve of Preston, very much." "Thank you, Pa." Nora embraced him tightly, grateful for his unwavering support throughout her life. The ceremony itself was everything Nora could have wished for: intimate, meaningful, filled with genuine emotion. Preston, handsome in a new suit, watched her walk down the aisle on her father's arm with such love in his eyes that Nora felt her heart might burst. Judge Parker conducted the service with dignity and warmth. When Preston spoke his vows, his voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving Nora's face. As she repeated her own promises, Nora felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her, as if her entire life had been leading to this moment, this man, this commitment. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Parker declared. "Mr. Vaughn, you may kiss your bride." Preston's kiss was tender yet passionate, a perfect balance that spoke of the partnership they were forming, respectful of the ceremony's solemnity, but also a promise of the intimacy they would soon share. The small reception that followed was filled with laughter and good wishes. Even Mrs. Abernathy, who had received an invitation more out of politeness than expectation, seemed moved by the obvious happiness of the couple. "Perhaps I was hasty in my judgment, Miss Nielsen, Mrs. Vaughn, that is," she said as she prepared to leave. "You do look remarkably happy. And your Mr. Vaughn seems quite devoted." "Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy," Nora replied graciously. "Sometimes life surprises us in the most wonderful ways." As the celebration wound down, Preston found Nora by the punch bowl, slipping an arm around her waist. "Ready to go, Mrs. Vaughn? Our train leaves early tomorrow." The sound of her new name sent a thrill through Nora. "Yes, I think I am." They had decided to spend their wedding night at the Grand Hotel, the same place where they had shared their first dinner together just 2 months earlier. It seemed fitting to begin their married life in the place where their courtship had begun. Once alone in their hotel room, a moment of shyness fell between them. For all their kisses and embraces, they had maintained proper boundaries during their courtship. Now, as husband and wife, those boundaries no longer existed. Preston seemed to sense her nervousness. "We have a lifetime together, Nora," he said gently, taking her hands in his. "There's no rush tonight." His consideration touched her deeply. "I love you," she said simply. "And I trust you completely." The smile that spread across his face was tender and full of promise. "And I love you, more than I can express with words." What followed was a night of gentle discovery and deepening connection. Preston proved to be as considerate and attentive in intimacy as he was in all other aspects of their relationship, guiding Nora with patience and care until passion overcame hesitation, and they truly became one in every sense. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, Nora felt a contentment she had never known before. This was what she had waited for, what she had refused to compromise on, not just a husband, but a true partner who valued her completely. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Nora smiled, pressing a kiss to his chest. "That sometimes the things people criticize you for turn out to be your greatest blessings." "How so?" "For years, Fort Smith has whispered about me, the spinster, the woman too particular or too independent to marry." Nora propped herself up on one elbow to look into his face. "But if I had married at 20 or 25 just to satisfy convention, I would never have found you." Understanding dawned in Preston's eyes. "You were waiting for the right man." "Yes," she agreed, remembering their conversation at the general store with Mrs. Abernathy. "I was waiting for you. I just didn't know it yet." Preston pulled her close, kissing her with renewed passion. "Then I'm grateful for your patience, Mrs. Vaughn, and I intend to spend the rest of our lives proving it was worth the wait." The next morning, they boarded the train for Oklahoma Territory, Edward traveling with them to begin his own new chapter. As Fort Smith receded into the distance, Nora felt no regret, only anticipation for the life ahead. 5 years later, Nora Vaughn stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching her husband return from the fields with their 3-year-old son, Thomas, perched in front of him on the saddle. Preston's face broke into a wide smile at the sight of her, his love as evident as it had been on their wedding day. The ranch had prospered under their joint management. Nora's organizational skills and business acumen had proven as valuable as Preston had predicted, allowing them to expand their operations and increase their profits substantially. Edward had established a successful forge in the nearby settlement, though he spent more time at the ranch these days, especially since Thomas's birth. As Preston lifted their son down from the horse, Nora placed a hand on her swelling stomach, feeling the movement of their second child within her. The doctor in Tahlequah believed it might be a girl this time, though they wouldn't know for certain until the birth, expected in 3 months. "How are my 2 favorite people?" Preston called as he approached, Thomas running ahead to wrap his arms around Nora's legs. "We're well," she replied, smiling as Preston leaned in to kiss her. "And how are the new calves? Thriving. The Wolf brothers say it's the best spring crop we've had." He placed a gentle hand on her stomach. "And how's our little one today? Active. I think she may be a dancer." Preston grinned. Just like her mother at the last Cherokee celebration. Thomas tugged at Preston's hand. "Papa, swing." "All right, young man, 1 swing and then we need to wash up for supper." Preston lifted the boy high into the air, eliciting delighted squeals. As Nora watched her husband and son together, A profound gratitude washed over her. The path that had led her here hadn't always been easy. She had endured years of judgment and whispers, moments of doubt and loneliness. But every step had been necessary to bring her to this place, this life, this love. "What are you thinking?" Preston asked, echoing his question from their wedding night as he came to stand beside her, Thomas now perched on his shoulders. Nora smiled up at him, her heart full. That everything happened exactly as it should have. That all those years in Fort Smith, all those whispers about being unmarried at 30. "We're just preparing you for the right man," Preston finished, his eyes warm with understanding. "For you," she agreed, reaching up to touch his face tenderly. "Always for you."